Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today, we're going to be talking about the U.S. military's color-coded war plans. If you're like me, you've studied the actual wars so much that to a certain extent it's not interesting anymore. So to get new content, you have to think about the wars that were never fought. The U.S. military, and other countries' militaries for that matter too, plan for that on a daily basis as a way of keeping sharp. The various color-coded war plans that we're going to cover today primarily date from the early 20th century, mostly from the teens, 20s, and 30s. By the late 30s, the U.S. military had switched over to a new type of war plans and uses a completely different system today. So this is primarily the interwar years between World War I and World War II, and a little bit earlier than that. This video is going to be the first in a series where we talk about some of these various war plans and what they entailed and if any of them was actually used. So things like the Plan Dog Memo, the Operation Garden Plot, and other similar plans in addition to all the various color-coded war plans. Today's video is just an overview of the different color-coded plans, because there were quite a few of them. So, first of all, blue. Blue is the United States. So, any of the war plans relating to blue relate to defending the United States and the defensive preparations, particularly in time of peace. When you get out of that, it goes into one of these other color-coded war plans. You go to war with X country, so then it becomes, and then you go from War Plan Blue to War Plan whatever their color is. War Plan White also relates to the United States. That was military preparations during this period for a domestic uprising. This was expected to involve communist insurgents in the country, but also included military plans for civil disturbances, peaceful protests, and other things like that. Part of the plan was used against the bonus force in 1932, but otherwise this plan evolved out of use and became other things later on. Perhaps the most well-known of these war plans is War Plan Orange. There's an entire book written about the various plans here because they tend to flip-flop back and forth between a couple of different options, and to a lesser or greater extent, we actually employed parts of these war plans against Japan. So that will almost certainly be a future video talking about just that. The next most developed war plan after Orange is War Plan Red. Red was the plan for the United States to go to war with Great Britain. Only once in the history of the world, to my knowledge, has the second greatest economic power overcome the first greatest economic power without a war. And that was when the United States became a greater power than Great Britain during World War II. We were on the same side, and yet by the end of the war, the United States was the greater power. Every other time something like this has happened, there is an actual fighting war between those countries. Yes, so prior to World War II, when the United States surpasses Great Britain, the plans for going to war with Great Britain were very highly developed. After the Washington Naval Treaty, Great Britain was the only other navy on parity with the United States, or rather, the United States became the only navy on parity with Great Britain, or at least approaching parity. While battleship numbers were similar, Great Britain had much greater cruiser and carrier and other forces like that. So these plans are really highly developed, and because a war with Great Britain meant a war with all of her colonial possessions, the U.S. came up with color-coded plans for them. Crimson would have been for an invasion of Canada. Ruby was intervention in India. Scarlet was Australia. Garnet was New Zealand. You notice how all of these are shades of red. Other war plans were less highly developed than these. In one instance, War Plan Black, this is because isolationists in particular didn't want to consider a war with Germany after ending World War I. So War Plan Black was the idea for a war with Germany, and post-World War I, Germany lost a lot of its power, and isolationists didn't want to plan it. So in order to avoid any sort of scandal, this war plan doesn't get a lot of attention in the interwar years, and it may be why some of the other war plans that we'll talk about further down the list do get some attention, even though they're kind of absurd and unlikely. The most developed part of War Plan Black was from just before the U.S. entered World War I, where we were afraid Germany would completely overrun France and then take control of France's possessions, her colonial possessions, particularly the colonial possessions. And so there was some concern that Germany, also controlling the French fleet at this point, would sail into the Caribbean to occupy these possessions. And because of the Monroe Doctrine, where the United States says that no more colonial powers can intervene in the Americas, the United States would be forced to go to war with Germany in that instance. While we're in the Caribbean, there was War Plan Gray. This is one of those colors that was reused over time. So initially, War Plan Gray was going to cover intervention in Central America, which gets its own color later on, Central America and the Caribbean. And a later development of this plan would have had the United States invading the Portuguese Azores. The Azores are one of the few large island groups in the Atlantic, not too far from the Mediterranean. So that would make an important fleet base and air base in the event of any sort of war. So while it's unlikely for an intervention there, it's not out of the realm of possibility, so it made sense to have a plan like that. Similar to Plan Gray, we had another one called Plan Indigo, which involved the occupation of Iceland. Again, a major island across the shipping lanes, this one in the North Atlantic, makes a good fleet base and air base. And this war plan more or less actually occurred. Denmark was occupied by Germany during World War II, and Iceland was a territory of Denmark. So the United Kingdom sent forces to Iceland in case the Germans invaded. One of the big fears when Bismarck sortied in May of '41 was that she was leading an invasion force to take Iceland. As part of the Destroyers for Bases deal, the United States takes over the occupation of Iceland prior to our entry in World War II and frees up those British troops to go and serve elsewhere. And so part of this plan does go into effect, even though we weren't doing any sort of contested operation. We did defend the area in case the Germans were going to come, and set up major bases at Haverfjord and elsewhere on the island for protecting the North Atlantic convoy routes. A large number of ships from the Atlantic Fleet even deployed there, even prior to the United States' entry into World War II. Also in the Americas were War Plan Purple, that just dealt with invading a South American republic. The U.S. got involved a lot in this earlier than the war plans during the Roosevelt administration, but despite involvement in South America, didn't really carry out this war plan at all. Likewise, War Plan Violet covered Latin America. Again, the United States intervenes there heavily, but doesn't execute this war plan. Let's see. Speaking of places where we intervene often, War Plan Brown was going to deal with an uprising in the Philippines, which we'd fought the Philippine-American War So it's not out of the realm of possibility. And then War Plan Can involved invading Cuba for a second time. And eventually, with the Bay of Pigs incident, the United States does support forces invading Cuba, but that falls outside the scope of these war plans. Another plan that was based on previous actions was War Plan Yellow. During the Boxer Rebellion, the United States, along with other imperial powers, had sent troops to quash a native uprising in China. And so War Plan Yellow assumed a similar incident occurring and dealt with plans for that, including the use of chemical weapons. War Plan Gold would have been a war with France, again, assuming that for whatever reason, the French Navy deploys to the Caribbean and tries to take over additional possessions in this hemisphere. So it's less an invasion of France or fighting on French soil, which would have been a useful war plan, and more, hey, what if the French come to our backyard? And so this is one of those ones unable to work on War Plan Black because another war with Germany would upset the isolationists. The war planners seem to sub in France because the French Navy would be hard-pressed to deploy overseas in significant numbers and hard-pressed to match the United States. However, these plans exist. War Plan Green would have been a war with Mexico. And this, again, the United States does intervene in Mexico while everybody else is fighting World War I. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. And so this plan is developed to overthrow the legitimate Mexican government if it expressed too many anti-American sentiments and replace it with a pro-American government. And the final war plan I'll talk about today is the first one that faces a multinational threat. And this is something that future iterations of the war plans that replace the color-coded plans will look at. So this is more of a transitional plan in this concept. And we will cover the rainbow war plans and other things in future videos. But this would be War Plan Red-Orange. So red for Great Britain, orange for Japan. This looks at a two-front war in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. And it looks at a war in which enemy allied powers are attacking the United States. This isn't too far out of the realm of the possible. Remember, we just talked about red and orange are the two most developed war plans. We're really expecting to go to war with one or the other of these countries. And up until the end of World War I, Japan and Great Britain had a formal military alliance that's deleted during the Washington Naval Treaty talks. So the concept of if the United States goes to war with one or the other country, which are the two countries closest in equality to us in military forces during this interwar period, it would make sense for them to try and ally with the other country to overthrow us. So there's some pretty serious war plans developed here. And the concept ends up being used somewhat for World War II. They realized that the United States cannot fight both fronts simultaneously. So one front will have to be a defensive war, while the other front will be offensive, which is what ends up happening with World War II. And the future iterations of war plans beyond the color-coded plans basically sub out Great Britain, which at this point is allied to us, and sub in Germany and Italy, or other Axis powers. And it basically still works out the same. So these war plans provide a very simple stepping stone for the actual plans that were developed during World War II. And that's the whole point. Junior officers with a lot of free time on their hands are tapped to develop these. And then they form the basis of war games. So either the military moving around miniatures on the floor at Newport, Rhode Island, or actual fleet maneuvers, like the U.S. Navy's fleet problems, which we covered in another video linked in the description below, where the actual fleet sails out and tests some of these strategies and ideas. And so these plans lead very heavily into World War II. They affect the design and development of future ships and the composition of the Navy and the Army. Not sure if I mentioned this before, but they are jointly planned. The whole reason for using color codes is so that both the Army and the Navy can adopt the same color for these various countries, and so that they can join their plans together. War Plan Red, the United States decides that they want to invade Canada, so the Navy develops a plan for blockading Nova Scotia, and the Army designs plans to send an army from New England into northeastern Canada. Boom. So they can work together on these. So in the comment section down below, let us know what war plan you think is the most interesting, which one you'd like to hear us talk about in a future video, and what are some countries you would expect to see war plans that I didn't cover on my list. For me, I'm surprised I don't see any for fighting in Russia or the Soviet Union during this time. The United States did intervene in Russia during the Russian Revolution in 1918-1919 time frame, but does not seem to have any war plans assigned to the Soviet Union. It seems like an interesting oversight. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, and also from a number of other businesses and individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate the support you guys have given us, and there's a link in the description below if you'd like to continue supporting the museum and our YouTube channel. Another way you can support us is by liking, sharing, and subscribing. That way more people find out about our content and our museum. Thanks for watching.